Alright, well, we're going to start with some pretty basic stuff here. Again, if you've used Photoshop, this may be review, but we'll also cover, I like to throw in new tips each time that I do something, so even if you already know the material, I think I'll probably cover some stuff that you don't know. So I'm going to just start a new document here and go up to the File menu and say New. And what you get here is some pretty basic dialogues to fill in. Basically, this relates to the size and resolution of the image that you're going to create. If you had something on your clipboard, this would actually default to that size. So if I had done a print screen to this, I would get width and a height that related to my the stuff that's on my clipboard, which would have been basically my two monitors. So some incredibly wide number followed by something around 768 for height. But this is basically the number of pixels, and probably most people know what a pixel is these days, but it's basically a little dot of color on your screen. And this is the resolution, and the relation between width and height and resolution determines the overall size of your document. So for now we won't worry about that, and we'll just go with something 1024 by 768, which is a pretty typical sort of number that you'll see. That's a typical ratio you'll see. And resolution is 150 dpi, we'll say. None of this really matters, but and then RGB is fine for now. We'll probably talk about this later on. Your other choices would be CMYK, which is more of a printer-oriented color scheme, grayscale, bitmap, etc. So we're just going to go with RGB. So okay. And what we get up here is now we notice that we have one tab, we have a blank sheet, and we have one layer over here. We talked about the layers in the last video. It's called background. So that's all well and good. And so what I'd like to do now is actually introduce the concept of layers. And I think a lot of people will know what a layer is, but if we're going to cover all our bases, then we have to start from the beginning. So first of all, what I'm going to do is actually go down here, and there is this button right here. Sorry, it's this one, Create New Layer. I'm going to click it. It actually looks like two little boxes, one small, one big, resting on top of each other. So I'm going to click it, and now I get this new layer, and it is called Layer 1, which isn't too surprising because our previous layer was background. And you'll notice, and we'll talk about this in a second, that it has a padlock on it. So, meaning it can't be moved, changed, or have anything behind it, which can be a major disadvantage, and we'll talk about that. But for now, I'm just going to go up here to my rectangular marquee tool, which is already active, and I'm going to draw out rectangle. And I'm going to go over here to the gradient tool, and gradient isn't what I want. And if you remember from the last video, what I really want is the paint bucket, and I happen to know that the paint bucket is always underneath the gradient tool. And so if I click this, then I can go to paint bucket tool. If I wanted to hold down shift and hit G, that would be the shortcut for cycling through my paint bucket and gradient. And right now, if I were to click here, it would do something. You'll see a little tiny preview. It may not be visible on the video, but I do now have a white box in here, but it doesn't actually appear to be anything because the background is white. So what I'd really rather do is maybe do black, and you'll see here two color swatches. One is white, one is black. That's the default swatch setup. The top one is the foreground, the back one is the background. And so the foreground is what matters when you're painting, using the paint bucket, things like that. And the background is what matters when you delete something on the background layer. But again, we'll talk about that in a second. So what I really want to do is switch these. So you'll notice this little button here, and it's called Switch Foreground and Background, and the shortcut is X. And I rarely click this button. I almost always just hit X. X, X. And I don't know why it beeps at me, but it does. And X is the button that I usually use for that, and I just never never really go over here. So anyway, now if I click in here, I now get a black box. And if I want to get rid of these things, these are called marching ants. That's just sort of their nickname. It means that this is still selected. If I want to get rid of those, I could probably go up to the select menu and say deselect. And that would work fine. I'm going to undo that, say edit, undo, deselect. But what I always do is I hit Control, and it'd probably be Command on the Mac, Control D, D for deselect, so Control D. So now the whole idea with layers is I have this little black box here. It's on top of my background layer. That's all well and good. But the advantage is now if I go to my move, I select it, and usually again I would hit V. Then I can, as long as I'm on this layer, I can click and move this, and it'll even snap to the corner here, etc. So you'll see there's some major advantages to having layers. You can see right away you end up with dozens and dozens of layers, and it's really good to name them. If I wanted to name this, I would just click twice on this layer 1, and I would say black box. And you can have spaces in your name. There's no problem with that. And you can click and move it all around. I could go down in here and I could create a new layer. And I could do a marquee tool. But maybe this time I will do a gradient. So I will hit G, which gets me to my paint bucket, and I'll hit Shift G, sorry. And that is funny. It's not. I'll just go through the menu. I'm surprised that it's. I think the video recording software is messing with my shortcuts. Anyway, the way this works, just to introduce a new tool, is you actually just click and drag. And if I don't want a crooked line, then I could hold down Shift. So click and drag and hold down Shift. And I'll get a nice gradient. It happens to be on spherical right now. Again, remember the control panel is contextual. So I could go up here and do that. Control D to deselect, and go up to the move tool and move this sucker around. So again, this isn't anything meaningful, it's just a demonstration. So now what we'll notice is that if we wanted to go to the background layer and delete it, we can do that, and it disappears, and that's fine. And what we actually get back here is a checkerboard which shows that this is transparent back here. You can't do that with a background layer there. What you have to do is either delete it like we did before with the delete key, or you can right click. And again, when I bring it back, I'm actually hitting Control Z, which is the shortcut for undo. So I will right click, I could say delete layer. And if we were to go here and we thought, well, maybe we don't want to delete the whole thing, maybe we just want to delete part of it, we could go here and say, well, we just want to delete this part, delete. And it says, oh, well, all you can do with a background layer is fill it. So do we want to fill it with black, gray, or white? But what we actually want is transparency. So we could say fill it with black, fine. Well, I'm going to go edit, undo. And actually, undo switches to redo, so we actually have to say step backward one more time. Control D to deselect. What we'd have to do is actually double click on this and say, let's call this layer 0. Okay. So now you'll notice the lock button has disappeared, and the layer is now called layer 0, and we can go up here, select this, and hit delete. And now we are left with a transparent checkerboard. Control D to deselect. And so that's the moral of the story with layers and with background layers, is that background layers cannot have transparency behind them. They cannot be moved. They can't be altered in that many ways. And so the only way to get rid of that is either delete it, or if you have something on there that you want to save, then you wouldn't delete it. You would rename it by double-clicking on it, double-clicking on the name of it right here, and calling it something besides background. Background is like this magic, magic name. And you could always say layer new background from layer if you were desperate for a background layer. But again, and then a little pro tip is if you hold down Alt and double click, you don't even get the dialog that we got before, the rename dialog. You just get it called layer 0. So that's it for layers. We'll cover more good stuff in the next video. Um, probably better layer management and tab management.